Okay, now we're going to turn our focus directly to the system board. Let's look at an overview of what we're going to cover first. First, we'll discuss the types of system boards and their components, then some considerations when buying a system board. Then we'll talk about timing and coordination on a system board. Then we'll take a look at the evolution in technology and how that's changed CPUs and buses. And finally, we'll look at setting up the CPU and the bus frequency. So let's look at the most common system boards first. Two most popular types are AT, which is the older board, and ATX, which is a newer board that contains a lot more resources. Main difference is size, convenience, the types of cases that they fit into, and the power connections that they use. You can always tell an ATX board because it has one power connector, which is called the P1 connector. The older AT boards used a P8 and P9 power connector coming off of the power supply. Each of those was connected on its own. Now even AT and ATX boards break themselves into two different categories. There's the regular AT, which is the oldest type of board. Later, the baby AT came out, which was just a smaller version of the AT board. It's a little less in width. It's the same length, but a little less width. The ATX board, which was developed by Intel for Pentium systems. And then the mini ATX. You can always tell if you have an ATX board because when you shut the computer down, if it says computer is shutting down and it can keep on going and actually shut down, that's what's called soft power or software enabled power, so that the computer can automatically shut itself all the way down. That was first available on an ATX board. The system board components include many components: the CPU and its chipset, the system clock, ROM BIOS, CMOS, RAM, RAM cache, expansion slots like the ISA slots and PCI slots, jumpers, ports, and power connections. This is a picture of an AT board. You can tell the board's really not that busy. The only port is a keyboard port. The AT board is just not nearly as busy a board as the ATX board. An ATX board contains all of the expansion slots, system clock, ports, but many, many more ports. You can see that this one has a mouse and keyboard port, USB ports, parallel and serial ports. The ATX board is a much, much busier board than the AT board. When we choose a system board, we choose a lot of things because our choice in a system board is going to determine the CPU types and speeds, the chipsets, memory cache, different types of expansion slots that we can have in it, the type of ROM BIOS. Pretty much everything is determined when we choose a system board. So if you're building a computer, put some thought into what you want that computer to be able to do. Things to consider are, is it designed so that long expansion cards don't get in the way of CPU and other devices? In other words, when you get under the hood, can you get to everything? Like one of the cars where you get under the hood and you can't even find the stick to find out whether you need oil or not. There are some system boards that are like that. You want to make sure you get a system board that's user-friendly to work with. How many different types of CPUs can it support, and how many CPUs can it support simultaneously? In other words, if you wanted to make this a supercomputer, right, a high-performance computer or a server, could you add another CPU? What bus speeds, what type of memory, if you have a case already, does it fit into the case? Does it support the older legacy cards? There's a lot to consider when we buy a system board. A lot of different manufacturers to buy a system board from. Motherboard.com, American Trends. Best place to find out information about buying anything that goes in a computer is, of course, on the internet. And here are some web addresses for the major manufacturers of system boards, but you may find an even better bargain out on the internet. My best advice is Do your homework. Make sure you get the system board that you need. So now that we've discussed an overview of system boards, next we'll turn our attention to some of the specific components in system boards.